The cannabis industry can be very scary and exciting at the same time, but you're not alone. Join the community and understand all the different influential people and ancillary providers who can help you scale and grow your audience and your business. I'm your host, Kham. Let's dive into the Cannabis Business Development Podcast. Today, we're excited to have another really great special guest who's going to share his story. And I think it'll be really helpful for those that are listening on a personal end, but also I think for businesses, to figure out how they can help other folks who are dealing with the same thing that Keith is doing today. And also welcome back our expert medical guru, Dr. Ben Caplan. How are you doing, Ben?
Hey, great. Thanks, Kham. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm super excited to have Keith here. I think he's got an amazing story that people really want to hear and can relate to. So it's an incredible day for me.
Right. So today we have Keith Black. Mr. Black has been diagnosed with autoimmune inflammatory arthritis back in 2015. And in 2018, he was disabled due to the loss of vision in his right eye, along with other nervous system disorders. So Mr. Black spent many years trying to manage his pain and inflammatory implementation using non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, pain meds, chiropractic therapy, etc. With all of those methods, he found no success. So since the legalization of marijuana, Mr. Black has looked to medical marijuana and has successfully managed and alleviated much of his pain and inflammation with a combination of medical marijuana alternatives. So we definitely look forward to hear what you have to say today, Keith, and to learn more about your whole story and journey. So welcome to the show.
Great, thank you. So as you'd mentioned, back in 2015, I was diagnosed with autoimmune inflammatory arthritis, and I had been a casual marijuana user up to that point and found myself in North Carolina at the time where marijuana wasn't legalized. So, I would buy marijuana like everybody did back then, which was, you didn't know what you were getting. They might have a name to it, but I didn't know there was even such a thing as sativa and indicas and different type of brands. But, I worked in pretty high-paced, high-tech business, and I needed it to help manage my pain and inflammation. And my struggle was, how do I do this during the day and get my work done? And then I needed it to unwind at night. And I was working using kind of the same marijuana to do two different things. And at the time, I didn't know any better. But, it did help me get by a little bit. But when I moved to Mass, I became a medical marijuana patient about 2 years ago. And I had spent the prior 3 years going through introductions of steroids, biologics for my arthritis. I was having muscular issues, spasms, stomach issues. And I finally became a medical marijuana patient and started my journey with Dr. Caplan, really learning what would help and what wouldn't. And the one thing I'll say, and I'll probably hear me repeat, is you're going to hear a lot of things from a lot of people. You can do a lot of reading, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of trial and error. What works for you? Because I find these strains don't exactly work the same for everybody. You have a different chemical makeup in your body and they affect you differently. But I've gotten to a point where last year was a real tough year medically for me. I was diagnosed on top of the arthritis with a small fiber neuropathy, a nervous system disorder, which has caused a lot of issues with, as you can see, my eyes. I'm wearing these glasses to protect me from light. I have stomach issues with spasming. I have muscle spasms. And I had a horrible year 2 years ago, and I started to manage all of this with a course of using marijuana as a medicine and not as a recreational drug. And it's kind of blown my mind when you start to make that shift and to think of it as a medication. And now I've been able to say, okay, here's my strain for the day. Here's my strain for night. Here's a strain if something acts up. And I'm no longer on steroids. And I'm no longer on anti-inflammatory medication, which blows my mind. I never thought I'd get off of it. I'm talking, things like Tylenol and aspirin and all those things everybody takes every day. Terrible for your stomach, terrible for your system. I don't take them anymore. And I have massive inflammation in my body that's now under control. So that's really the kind of high level about what got me to where I am, why I'm on the call today. And I wanted to share, some of the lessons I've learned from both a buying strategy and how you can save money because it can get expensive, but also from how you can be most effective in choosing which strain is going to work for you and managing your specific medical issues.
Awesome. Thanks, Keith. I think as we keep going, I hope we'll have time to hear your thoughts about sort of the opiate path and what it took to help you with getting rid of opiates from your regimen. But also, one of the things that I found interesting about your path, Keith, was your aversion to edibles. In the past, we talked about how they didn't really agree with you, that you had some reactions to edibles. And I'd love for you to teach people about your experience.
And Dr. Caplan, knows, but, I always go back to them occasionally and I continue to have the same problem. So why am I doing it? Because they're edibles and they seem like a fun thing to do. But honestly, an edible, in marijuana terms, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's much more difficult to have it as a medicine, as a sativa or an indica, because of the way it's made. That's my understanding. And if you're inhaling or using a tincture, you're much better off in getting that indica, sativa, or specific strain type of help and geared towards what you're using it for. And the edibles did two things. They just made me tired, sleepy. I couldn't get anything done. They put me to sleep and I felt groggy. I felt awful, and it would last a day and a half. What was the point? I don't feel that way when I utilize certain tinctures and flowers to my daily regimen and do it. Here's something that's going to keep me awake and alert and energized, and here's something that's going to help me relax. And tinctures work great. They work quickly. The edibles take 2 hours on average. It can take an hour and a half. It can take 2.5 hours, depending on what you ate. And then some people are like, oh, they're not working, I'm going to smoke. And the next thing you know, you're in the hospital. And I'm not joking about that. I've actually seen people go to the hospital from edibles, which blows me away because marijuana has never affected me like prescription drugs has. And that's one of the reasons I love it. You talked about the opioids. I had cancer last year as well. And so it upticked my opioid level. And I think I'm the first patient ever to say, get me off of opioids. I mean, everybody loves them. I'm like, no, I don't want to be on them. And the medical industry didn't have a path forward unless they wanted to put you down as an addict. So I used marijuana to taper myself off. I mean, it was wonderful. And, people say, well, that's impossible. But, if you start to really understand, work with Dr. Caplan, utilize your resources and understand what's going to help you with what. I mean, you're not going to smoke a sativa to get off of an opioid. I don't recommend that at all. You want something that's more of a mellow and helps with anxiety. And by the way, it's not just opioids. I'm no longer on any anxiety medication. Now, I will say I've done some mindfulness techniques as well to go along with marijuana, mind, body. So I've got my mind, I meditate, body, I've got my marijuana, and it really works well.
I'm glad, Keith, you brought up the meditation because, a lot of people don't know how cannabis fits into the rest of their lives. Your question about flower and the sort of breadth of the natural option versus the edibles actually relates more to mindfulness and setting than you might think. One of the things that makes cannabis so interesting is that the plant is incredibly complex. In terms of its ingredients, it's a little bit like having an entire store of pharmaceuticals put into a blender that this one plant naturally produces. There's so much in there, like really over 500 different compounds. That's part of the natural plant, the flower. I think from your lips to all the billboards, this is the story that I hear consistently, that people are not only getting off of other medicines using cannabis, but the topicals are incredibly powerful. In Western medicine, we don't have, really great topicals where the results are so dramatic, but I hear it all the time with cannabis.
I think you just hit the nail on the head. We have so many topical ointments that don't work, and they're all, snake oil salesman stuff. This is not snake oil salesman. That's all I can say. You have to try it. I think, again, I said at the beginning, experiment, try, and you'll find your way through it. Listen to what people say so you don't have to spend a ton of money. And honestly, Dr. Caplan, you've helped me a lot in my journey, and I thank you for it.
It's a privilege being there with you. I think the opportunity to help people like you who are sort of lost to some degree, kind of what works in general terms, but to help narrow that focus down and help mostly support with education and information is a real privilege for me. And my hope, honestly, is that some of the clinicians who are watching can understand that this is real medicine, that people are really getting value out of it. They are really helping themselves, not only treat what they're doing.
I feel like you're the setup guy for me right now. So when you say, the doctors, the medical facilities, I will say this, with the small fiber neuropathy, when I was diagnosed, I was shocked from a rheumatology perspective, oncology perspective, primary care perspective, and my neurologist. 4 doctors across the board all said CBD THC. Not only did they not have a problem with it, they recommended it. You don't see it in my patient notes because they can't put it in the patient notes. But, they all, said, you really should try it. They have a lot of patients at work. I already let them know I was. And small fiber neuropathy, it basically is for those who don't understand. I mean, if you have fibromyalgia, things like that, it's a nerve disease. And, I just want to put it in terms that a lot of people out there might understand. So for something like that, I'm telling you right now, that balm, THC, CBD, and then using the products. I mean, just so you understand what I use, I do a flower, tinctures, and then the full spectrum. So pretty much my product mix. And then, occasionally I'll throw in a keif or, some kind of high THC, something or other when I'm having a really bad day.
For people that are curious, the reason that this stuff is working for keif is actually because the cannabinoids bind to receptors in our brains, which actually also bind to the opiates. So when you were taking opiates, they were giving you some pain relief. There are receptors in your brain called the mu opiate receptors. Cannabis happens to bind to those same receptors, although in smaller, less powerful increments. So as you described, you were getting relief from the opiates hitting that receptor, but then as cannabis also hits that receptor, you can take it consistently enough and be able to avoid the dependency on opiates.
Yeah.
So Dr. Caplan, we were talking about topicals too. And why is it that a lot don't work, but then it seems like there's this momentum, right? Where cannabis, it does work. Some people think, what's the secret sauce here? What's happening?
So it's actually just education. Knowledge really is power. There are components of cannabis which help cannabis penetrate more deeply, help the anti-inflammatory aspects of the plant penetrate the skin more deeply. If a company doesn't know what they're doing, if they think THC is the answer, CBD is the answer, or maybe it's some combination of those, if they're not thinking beyond just the simple, then they're leading themselves astray and they're leading their patients astray, the people they're serving. And a lot of people are disappointed. Unfortunately, R&D and medical advisors and scientific advisors are expensive. And it's hard to sort of figure out how that fits into a business model. But without real science, without appropriate testing and appropriate sort of modeling with customers, you end up with a product that's not working and it turns people off. So it ends up being a losing opportunity.
So education, you said, is a lack, but what else is lacking? Because I feel like, there are so many great use cases for topicals that are like for modern everyday issues, when it comes to like pain and migraine. Why is it not more mainstream?
I think the cannabis industry is still very much in business infancy, that they have spent, in many cases, the dispensary systems, the companies have spent a lot of money on infrastructure and development and very little on, some places are licensing out formulas from other people because they know they want to make money and they want a formula that works. Maybe they're not developing their own brands. Maybe they don't know that that's an important part of customer service. And especially as the cannabis industry is starting to mature in slow increments, there's competition coming. And I think people are being pushed out of the market because they're not putting in the extra effort.
I personally, I'll just, you can agree or disagree, but, THC is not a federally approved drug. CBD is. You see it in all the stores, you see it CVS. So I think it'll make its way into all the products as soon as that happens, whenever that might be. But I think that's something that's also limiting it to show up in all the stores. And, I'm not going to get into politics or anything, but, they've got a long way to get through when, doctors are going to recommend it as a medical solution. I mean, they're doing it casually, but I think, with the system today, I think there's a lot of hurdles, just with THC not being federally approved.
Yeah, no, Keith, I think that's a great point. I think the lack of federal legalization has really been a handicap for research. If there isn't enough research to push the needle for understanding, then companies are certainly not going to adopt something that's iffy and unfounded. So they have to often do their own research, and that's just expensive.
Let me ask you a question. Clinical trials, are they doing clinical trials?
Yeah, there are clinical trials being run all the time. But one of the interesting problems with cannabis is that maybe the old tools don't apply well. We, in science, we like to think that we have the right set of tools, randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses are the traditional sort of gold standards of medical understanding. But, what if the placebo effect is governed by the endocannabinoid system? That creates some confounding within the randomized controlled trial framework. That becomes a method of study that doesn't apply anymore. And on the other side, meta-analyses is when you're combining studies that have been done in the past, looking for trends between them. If the studies of past were conducted by the National Institutes for Drug Abuse, if they were biased against cannabis, if they were mostly looking at people who smoked cannabis instead of using edibles or vapor. You have a lot of inherent variability and confounding that will send signals and send the meta-analyses down a wrong path.
I mean, there's just so much information out there, but yet there's so much lack of ways to find it or lack of information. So, I mean, Keith, hearing you just like talk about all this stuff, I mean, it really sounds like I could be talking to Dr. Ben, right? So like for other people saying, how did Keith get all this information? Walk us through like what happened in the beginning and then where do you find, like, what were the challenges?
3 years ago, I barely knew the difference between a sativa and an indica. And pre-COVID, thank God, I was able to go into the dispensaries and talk to the people. And I'll tell you, some people were unbelievably knowledgeable, some weren't. I shared with them my medical issues. Every year, I went to Dr. Caplan to get my card renewed, and I did not take the 15-minute quick call just to get my card renewed. I always spent an hour with him, and we had fascinating conversations. He's provided me with research, but honestly, as I said at the beginning, it was trial and error. So I started to listen to people tell me what worked for certain things. I talked to customers when they were in there, and I finally found things that started working for me. I'm still learning every day. I'm still finding new products every day. I've learned that I can make my own keif by having a grinder and, you know, letting all the resin and everything fall to the bottom, and I don't have to go and buy it. I mean, one of the things I'll talk about at some point when you tell me it's a good time is, how do you go out and buy and afford this? Because it can be expensive. One of the other reasons I don't do edibles is it's too expensive. It's not the best bang for the buck. Flower is the best bang for the buck, but a lot of people don't like to smoke, you know, and so I went to tinctures. I thought they were the be all to end all, and they would be if they weren't so expensive. And by the way, you know, you find out things like, hey, a tincture works quicker than anything else. So if I'm in distress, I want a tincture. I don't want to go and take an edible. I may not even want to go and try flower if I need quick, you know, relief. And by the way, tincture doesn't go through your liver and your stomach, and it's, you know, there are things that are better for you. The edible does. The flower, same thing. I had issues with my lungs, issues with my stomach. I had cancer, I have arthritis. So I had to be aware of all these things, and I had to take it very seriously. And a lot of people only do this casually. I was very serious about the use. I became my own doctor. And I finally got myself to this point where I literally, you know, have different types of strains for the day and based on how I'm feeling. And I am disabled, so I have a lot of time on my hands. But yeah, it's, you know, reading. There is no NIH, to Dr. Caplan's point. I couldn't go to the National Institute of Health and say, hey, you know, maybe they do have something on it now. I wouldn't be surprised Dr. Caplan talked about that. But I went to them for all my health issues, and they never talked about CBD and THC. I would love to see at some point a Mayo clinic that focuses on this. If you had that, you would start to solve a lot of problems, give people a place to go to and have a place to do everything from, you know, the trials and everything else. And what an amazing concept that would be, to have a holistic center that has a, you know, THC, CBD, marijuana component to it. I think would be amazing. And I actually see that someday down the road, that you'll see these clinics popping up. I know they've already talked about having places where you can go and smoke in public and, you know, meet other people and talk about, you know, what's going on. And I think that would be good. I think socializing it would be great. People come to me. They call me their concierge. So talk to the people who know their best. If you don't know anyone, go into the store or talk to them online and utilize Dr. Caplan's resources. I have. That got me started. You know, there's a lot of stuff there. And I have a hard time reading, so don't tell me you can't read. And there's podcasts like this one.
No, exactly. I think, you know, Keith, one thing that makes me really proud from what you said was your agency, you know, the autonomy that you've had learning on your own. I think the model that is now becoming passé is where the doctor does everything. And one thing I tell my patients now is, my definition of success is when patients can be their own leader, when it's about their own success and their own journey. They're their own bus driver.
That's where the medical system's broke. Nobody wants to take responsibility. And when they do, it's the wrong way. I'm sorry. I feel so strongly about that because of what I've been through. I can't tell you how frustrated I am with the doctors. And I do feel like I've become my own doctor. And I have seen the medical system go towards that. I think they're looking to that. Primary care physicians are now saying, go to the specialist. I'm not even going to say anything. And the other thing I'll say is share with your doctors that you are having THC and CBD. They're not going to put you in jail. They're not going to, have you go see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It's not looked down on that way. And every doctor I talk to says, good for you. You're managing the symptoms. Continue doing that.
No, it's such an important thing that everybody really should hear, because that's the message I'm hearing also in clinic, that, doctors are over the don't ask, don't tell thing. They're over that's just for addiction. Doctors are really, as you've described and experienced, they're embracing it and realizing that it's working. Hopefully the next step is for doctors to start learning about it and to be able to advise their patients. But until then, I'm happy for them to recommend, referring them to specialists, because I think there are a few of us who really do care.
I think a good next step to talk about after that is, how do you afford it? Because what I just talked about is trial and error. And that can be really expensive, and it was for me. Like I said, with tinctures and edibles, it was killing me. And I ended up going to more of a tincture flower type of thing. And even the flower was killing me. I mean, depending on where you go, it's $300 to $400 an ounce. How do you afford that? What if I told everybody on this call, I've got it to under $150 an ounce? How is that possible for a medical marijuana patient? It is. But it took me this journey, and it took me working with 8 different dispensaries to find the one that had a frequent buyer program. They give me discounts before the general public. They treat their medical patients great. They give you discounts based on the amount you're buying. And now they have things called value flower. There are things, everything from shake to value flower to high end. And how do you know the differences? Is it worth it? Don't buy the shake, anybody, unless you're cooking. It's not worth it. But the value flower is worth it. For me, if it's over 20% THC, I consider it medical, and it's going to work for me. And I've been buying 1 ounce of, same thing. It comes in a 1 ounce package. Instead of paying $300-$400, those packages are $200. You get them on a 20-30% off sale, and now you're paying less than $150. Buy in bulk. You save a lot of money. But don't buy 4 different levels of strains. And if you don't understand the levels, talk to the place you're buying it from, and they'll explain it to you. Is it worth it to pay $5-$10 more for a couple of points in THC? Sometimes. Depends what you're using it for. So, that was something that took me a long time. My spend was really high, and I've cut it more in half. And I have one that I can walk to right next to me, but I use one that delivers. I used to go up to Maine all the time because it was so much cheaper in Maine, but Maine's not regulated. You don't know what THC level you're getting. And, sometimes you can be very surprised. Their products are good, but there's a war now in Massachusetts, and the dispensaries are all competing, and there's a lot of them, and it's driven the price down. And if you buy in bulk, and find the right mix for you. If you're going to do all tinctures and edibles, good luck. It's expensive. At least for me. I mean, I need a lot. I have inflammation in my whole body, and I have to stop it. And just by the way, for those wondering, I get tested for it. I get a blood test. I forget what it's called, CPR, CRP. It doesn't show inflammation in my body.
Keith, you mentioned you kind of, I don't know if you hacked a solution or you're doing some stuff on your own. Can you walk us through like what that process looks like at home for you?
As far as,
I believe you said you were either grinding or you were doing something.
Yeah. So that's actually really, I'm glad you brought that up. So flour, boy, you can waste a lot of money with flour too, right? You really shouldn't be touching the flour too much, because I don't want to get into a whole medical marijuana and science and everything. Dr. Caplan's better at that. But the trichomes and those little crystally things that you see on it, you want those. And the less you touch, the better. So if you're taking those and putting them directly into a bong or a bowl or rolling a joint, you're going to lose a lot of the potency. And you're going to lose a lot of the pot because you're not able to get it into its finest amount. I mean, nowadays, especially the indoor grown, it's very dense. And you have to grind it. And it just, you'll see it kind of fluffs out. But in the grinders, they have a very small little mesh that catches all that stuff that I said don't touch. And then you can unscrew the bottom of the grinder and you have your own keif. And what keif is, it's the trichomes and all the good stuff that comes off of the buds that's smokable. You could buy it. It's going to cost you $100 for 1 gram of keif. I can guarantee you, I have 3 grams right now sitting at the bottom of my grinders. And you only need a little. You add it to the bowl and it adds the potency and it helps you extend how long your marijuana lasts significantly. But a lot of people don't know that. And I don't know, Dr. Caplan, if you agree, but I find the less you touch it, the better off you are. And using a grinder is a very good idea.
Your hands generally are quite oily, even though they might not feel that way. And oil attracts oil. And the more you're touching cannabis products with your hands, the more it gets distributed to your hands instead of to where you want it to be.
And I just think you do better. You get a lot more out of the grinder, and you lose a lot less. I find it's definitely much more efficient. And I've seen it from a lot of other people. Everybody I know is now using grinders and getting a lot more use out of their flour. So one thing, I don't know if we have time to talk about, but I talked about using it for medical purposes. And I think one of the most important things I learned is there's indica and sativa. I assume most people on this call know what they are. I'll just say real quickly, I found in general, indicas work really well for my anxiety, for some of my stomach issues, my muscle spasms especially, and for stress relief. There are some indicas that work really well for pain relief as well. I have found one particular, I'll name a couple brands, Blue Nana is one that's really good for pain and whatever, but there's 88 hash plant galacticus that I find are phenomenal for, both anxiety, stress relief, and help with the muscle cramps and everything. And then on the flip side, I was never smoking a sativa until I found out there are some sativas that work for me, and it was the terpenoids that made a difference. And for me, it was more of the piney terpenoids, the mersaline, but things like frozen lemon, citral glue, there may be hybrid leaning sativa or sativas, Cinderella 99, phenomenal for pain. So there are sativa and hybrids that work great for pain, but they also don't kind of make you couch locked. They give you energy. They allow you to get things done. And there's a huge difference between the two. You're not going to get things done with an indica. I'm sorry. I mean, you might if you're out and doing things, but you're really not going to get as much done. They almost force you not to. And it's the sativas and the others. If you've got to do some work and you've got to be organized, you've got to go towards those. And they actually help motivate you towards that direction. It's interesting. But I will say there were a lot of sativas I couldn't take. I mentioned that, you're going to have to find out, people out there, what terpenes work best for you. And what's interesting is everybody thinks, hey, I need a 30% marijuana strain because this one's only 14 and it's not strong. Well, guess what? If you're taking it for certain reasons, it's the terpenes that help as much as the THC content. And that's very much a personal, it affects everybody differently. I've seen it. And, there's one called, my favorite out there is a frozen lemon, if you can ever find it. It's a beautiful hybrid that leans towards a sativa, but has some, relaxing, anxiety, stress reducing effects. So it's important that you understand the strains. I mentioned to buy in bulk. Tahoe OG is one that I find out there in bulk at like a 22%. I'm buying it for 150 or less for an ounce. I was spending that for a quarter.
Awesome. Yeah, Keith, I think the takeaways really from you are many, but your ability to understand what you don't know and seek resources to be able to piece it together. Some of that was guided, but some of it was very much on your own, looking to what was working for you and what you didn't like. And that was a lot of self-reflection, some introspection. The challenge with a complex plant, meeting a complex person, is piecing the two together and figuring out where the overlap is, where the mismatch is. And this is a long journey. I mean, this is, like you said, not taking you less than 2 or 3 years. You and I have been working together for 5 years now.
There's new products, new research. That's why I utilize you. That's why I do these things. Absolutely. And I appreciate everything you've done. But, I think the best thing for me is my journey was to get off medication. And no different than when I got off medication, I started adding things in to see how that I did the same with marijuana. You've got to take it seriously if you're using it as a medical patient. I mean, sure, people have fun with it and you can use it recreationally and people have no problem with that. But if you start to use it medically, it really opens things up to you. And it's amazing. I am so frustrated with the medical system. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how frustrated I am. To get an appointment to get off a medication or get on a medication, you got to wait 3 months. It's ridiculous. And the doctors know less, I think, about some of the medications than I'm starting to find out about marijuana. And that blows me away.
It's an astoundingly complex field. And one of the things we're going to talk about on a future episode is a company I've put together, which is really trying to simplify that complexity. I think at this point, with complex person and complex plant, we need a little bit of artificial intelligence, a little bit of computing power to help simplify the puzzle. And I'm trying to bring it to bear.
I think you'll see a day that opiates are replaced by this.
I hope you're right.
Yeah, me too.
Doctors are so against opiates now that this is why I think they're starting to recommend marijuana. They'd rather have their patients, looking towards something like that. So I think that's a good step. And maybe Dr. Caplan, that's something we can leverage to, keep the momentum going. An anti-opiate program, hidden under the marijuana leaf.
Well, Keith, I want to really thank you for being open and vulnerable and sharing your story, because I think a lot of people can get some great takeaways here. And Dr. Ben, just you always giving the insight and connecting all those to the science behind cannabis and telling the truth behind it. Well, thank you so much for both of your time today, and wish you the best luck, and probably hopefully have you back and keep us filled in on some of the newer things that you're trying out.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Keith.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for spending your time with us. This podcast is for you. And if you have any topics you'd like to learn more about or suggestions, please email us at podcast@indicativemarketing.com. And don't be a stranger. Connect with me on LinkedIn.